Newport, off the starboard bow.
Newport. It's been 200 years.
Oh, yes, lad. Many times. My brother had a print shop downtown that's still in business. Newport has been a favorite summer vacation land for centuries. Some people say it was the first summer vacation land. The Indians came here nearly 3,000 years ago. The abundance of fish and clams and lobster, the fresh water from cool springs, the cool breezes, made it a natural place for their summer campgrounds.
What about the white men?
Well, some people believe that the first white men who came here were Vikings, more than 1,000 years ago. There's an old tower downtown that some people believe was built by the Vikings. That was 500 years before Columbus discovered America. 100 years after that, the Italian explorer Verrazzano sailed into these waters. And it was another 100 years after that Roger Williams came here seeking religious freedom. Captain, I selected the Providence because I knew this vessel on my former visits to Newport. I knew her master, John Paul Jones. I'm anxious to see the changes in Newport after 200 years, the old and the very new.
Where are you going first, Dr. Franklin?
First, I'm going to find an inn, and then I'll begin at the beginning. Good afternoon, madam. I'm Dr. Benjamin Franklin, a printer visiting Newport, and may I visit your inn?
Welcome. Come in. We have rooms, and I'd be happy to show you around.
The comfort and hospitality of an inn like this is more familiar to me than the more elaborate hotels. Of course, this is certainly much better than the dirty hovels with greasy food that one was apt to find in my day. Shall we see the rest of the house? Here in the heart of Newport is what many people believe to be one of the oldest structures on the American continent of non-Native American origin. Oh, there are detractors who say that it was built during colonial times, perhaps by Benedict Arnold, first governor of Rhode Island and an ancestor to the infamous Revolutionary War traitor. But modern scholarship and research has said that this stonework is of a type used by the Vikings and is identical to some that the Norsemen used in similar structures in their native lands of Norway and Sweden. The piers line up with the cardinal points of the compass. Was it perhaps a religious structure, or maybe just a declaration, "We were here"? Were the Vikings our first summer visitors to Newport? If so, they left no written record, and they told no one. It was nearly 600 years before the colonists came, and my, they did leave records. About 300 buildings still stand here in Newport, buildings from colonial times, homes, churches, taverns, and a library. The Redwood Library is right over here. Shall we visit it? The Redwood Library is the oldest library in America. It was built in 1748 and is still in use. Reverend Ezra Stiles, a later president of Yale University, was librarian here. Reverend Channing did the scholarly research that led to the founding of the Unitarian movement here. The building was designed by Peter Harrison, America's first architect. It was designed in the Palladium style, and these columns and these walls are actually made out of wood, a common and perfectly acceptable deception at the time. I'm sure you recognize the statue of my good friend General George Washington, a frequent visitor to Newport. Here in the nearby Colony House, he and Rochambeau planned the Battle of Yorktown, the most decisive battle of the Revolutionary War. This is the Colony House, the oldest Capitol building in the United States. George Washington spoke to the people from that balcony. Inside, he met with Lafayette and Rochambeau. Inside, they planned the Battle of Yorktown. Inside, the chaplain of Rochambeau and Lafayette said the first Catholic Mass in Rhode Island. And inside, the General Assembly of Rhode Island ordered the first shots of the American Revolution fired upon British ships. The British vessel was called the St. John, and no serious damage was done, and the ship turned tail and ran, but the shots were fired. Freedom proclaimed. And inside, the General Assembly signed the first Declaration of Independence, declaring Rhode Island a free and independent republic 2 months before July the 4th, 1776, when the rest of the colonies followed suit. This is another Peter Harrison building, an old marketplace where they sold meat and fish and vegetables and slaves. This is also the site of the Newport Massacre, which took place 2 years before a similar incident in Boston. Local rowdies were taunting British naval personnel. Finally, the Navy lost their temper and fired on the unarmed civilians, killing 1 man. That was before the Revolution, but fortunately today the old building serves as an entrance to the brick marketplace, a place of fun and excitement. pineapple has long been a symbol of hospitality in New England. It had its origins when the sailors from the seas would return. Their wives would set out pineapples to let everyone know that their husbands were home and they were receiving guests. It meant welcome. Pineapples are every place in Newport. And there you are, my furry friend. As poor Richard said, a penny saved is a penny earned, but there are many places in the brick market that call for our pennies. Let's look at some of the more than 300 other colonial buildings in Newport. The oldest house still standing in Newport is the Wanton Lyman Hazard House. It was sacked during the Stamp Act riots of 1765. The riots continued for several days. Rochambeau and Washington stayed here in the Vernon House while they worked on the Battle of Yorktown. The Hunter House was the headquarters of Admiral de Ternay, commander of the French naval forces during the American Revolution. There are many treasures in Newport, some of them very old. As a matter of fact, Captain Kidd is reported to have buried treasure here. Many pirates visited Newport. It was a famous summer resort even then. And William Mays, Jr., the famous pirate, returned to Newport laden with riches and received a hero's welcome. Shortly after that, his father bought this building and turned it into a tavern. It had been built as a residence in 1673, but in 1687, the elder Mays obtained a tavern license. Then the pirate, now reformed, settled in Newport and succeeded his father as innkeeper and was granted a license in 1702 to sell all sorts of strong drink. The rafters and the floors are original boards on the inside. And as a matter of fact, when it was refurbished and turned into a tavern again, they had some trouble obtaining a liquor license because of the proximity of the church next door.
Actually, Mr. Franklin, it's lucky we're sitting sharing this drink together because of our proximity to the church next door. We were unable to serve alcoholic beverages, but fortunately we went through legislation with the help of the Preservation Society and obtained a special license which said that any tavern built before 1730, which so happens to be us, was able to serve alcohol within 200 feet of a church. So we're the only ones that have that privilege here in Rhode Island.
While the tavern may have been furnished with pirate booty, the citizens of Newport were far from all being brigands. Churches abounded. Karen mentioned the one next door, and just across the street is the old Quaker meeting house. Shall we go see it? Karen, thank you so much for a delightful afternoon. This church was built in 1699, making it the oldest Quaker meeting house in America, still in use as a church today. I had, of course, known many Quakers in Philadelphia, but because of the religious liberty in Rhode Island, the Quakers settled here in Newport nearly 10 years before Philadelphia was discovered. This was a power center, and by the late 1600s and early 1700s, nearly 50% of the citizens of Newport were of the Quaker persuasion. George Fox, their greatest leader, preached here, and the aged Roger Williams rode across the bay to debate with him. Another group who came to Rhode Island seeking religious liberty were Sephardic Jews from Portugal and Spain. They established here a congregation, Jesut Israel, and in 1763, this lovely synagogue was designed by Peter Harrison, the first American architect who did the Redwood Library. As you can see, it is setting at an angle to the street. That way the congregation can, during services, face Jerusalem. The synagogue was named for Isaac Toro. And here beside me, reproduced in bronze, is a message to the Hebrew citizens from General George Washington. Words from this letter still carry a message of hope to persecuted peoples around the world. They were quoted on this commemorative United States postage stamp issued in 1982. To bigotry, no sanction. To persecution, no assistance. George Washington. Another site of historical interest is Trinity Church. One of Newport's outstanding landmarks, Trinity Church was built by Richard Munday in 1726 and has been virtually unchanged since the 1770s. George Washington had a pew here, and the painter Gilbert Stuart, famous for his paintings of the general, played Trinity's organ in order to support himself while he learned his painting. That organ, by the way, was a gift to the church in 1733 by Dr. George Berkeley. It was the second organ in America and had once been played by Handel. The beautiful fountain and surrounding garden were given to Trinity Church and to the people of Newport by Robert Goulet in memory of his parents and wife. The triple-decked wine-glass pulpit is unique in American churches. Visitors are welcome here every day and guided tours are given. From Trinity Church looking down toward the sea is Newport Harbor. The sea has always been vital to Newport. In the early days, it provided accessible and inexpensive transportation to ports throughout the world, moving people, produce, and manufactured goods. Manufactured goods were taken to ports, traded, especially they were taken south into the Indies and traded for molasses, which was brought back and turned into rum. Distilleries were all over Newport. So prevalent were they that there was even a distillery in the basement of the Colony House. The rum was taken to Africa, traded for slaves. The slaves were taken back to the Indies, traded for molasses. Molasses were brought back to Newport, traded to rum. The triangle of trade. The people prospered. Slave labor was important. It provided a cheap labor force, essential. The contribution of slaves to the development of this country is inestimable. Religious leaders such as Samuel Hopkins, Moses Brown, and Ezra Stiles acted as a conscience for the General Assembly, causing them in 1774 to pass a law abolishing the importation of slaves. And because it was customary to give slaves their freedom after 10 years, it was anticipated that by 1884, the very institution of slavery should be abolished. This was one of the first of such laws to be passed in America. The sea is still vital to Newport. There are hundreds of pleasure yachts, and these in turn attract thousands of tourists. And while you're in Newport, you will want to see the harbor. Perhaps one of the best ways is a harbor cruise. Let's go.
Okay, you got it. Lobster Company is the largest exporters of shellfish in the Rhode Island area. They welcome you to go in there when you're finished with the tour here. They have several tiers of lobster tanks, and it's not unusual to find 30-pound lobsters in there. It's especially fun for kids to go in. We're just coming along what's known as Long Wharf, and this has been in existence since 1685. And right here at the tip of Long Wharf is where what we call Newport's lobster fleet is located. Most of the lobster boats that come out of Newport dock here. If you're not familiar with how lobsters are caught, they're caught in something like a wooden crate. There's several stacks of them up on this middle dock. They have a dual-chambered net inside, and the pot is weighted and bait is placed inside, and then the whole thing is dropped onto the ocean floor because that's where lobsters are. They're scavengers. And hopefully the lobster will crawl in, take the bait, and then is not able to maneuver its way back past the second net. Average size lobster around here is about 2 pounds. So if you do get into the Aquidneck Lobster Company, you'll be able to appreciate some of the large lobsters you'll see in their tanks.
Newport Harbor is awash with pleasure boats, from lavish luxury yachts like this one to more modest vessels. Sails can be seen all over the harbor, dancing on the wind. From our cruise ship, we can see such sights as Fort Adams, the lighthouse that Ida Lewis kept, that brave lady who saved 18 lives and received a Congressional Medal of Honor. The house on the rock, purchased in the 1960s for a little over $3,000 in back taxes. And we can see the backside of some of Newport's mansions and summer cottages, like Hammersmith, Castle Hill, and Bonnycrest. Mr. Duncan, who built Bonnycrest, was chairman of the board of Lee and Parents, and the chimneys are shaped like Worcestershire sauce bottles. Of course, there are many others. And where would Newport be without fishing, whether commercially, from a chartered boat, or a smaller one, or just from a comfortable perch on the rock? The big ones are out there. By the way, that's the Yachting Museum. We'll visit it later. And now we come into our safe harbor. The sea breeze has stimulated my appetite. Shall we find lunch? Good restaurants abound in Newport, but this close to the harbor, how can anyone think of anything but seafood? Fresh fish, lobsters are caught daily, and it's just a step from the boat to the pot to the table. Shellfish and lobster were ever popular, even 200 years ago, but never served in such sumptuous manner here at Salas's restaurant. Salas's has been a must for over 30 years in Newport. And why not? With generous proportions, a view of the bay, a congenial host. You will excuse me. And a short time ago, this fellow was enjoying life in the bay, and now he is making my life more pleasurable. After a meal such as that, I recognize the need for exercise. If you feel the same, you may wish to stroll along Newport's famous and beautiful cliff walk. The walk starts at Memorial Boulevard near Newport Beach and winds along the rugged cliffs overlooking the blue Atlantic Ocean. You may want to wear your walking shoes. Although the walk is only 2 miles long, you must return, unless you have someone waiting for you there. On one side, the sparkling water catches the sun. On the other side, the sun is reflected off of Newport's elegant mansions and summer cottages. You will pass directly under the Oriental Pagoda, which is part of the Marble House estate. Surfers may be seen when the waves are right, and all of the scenery is not to be found in water and rocks. And even the most athletic of us does need a rest along the way. One cannot remain with even such delightful company as that, for there is so much in Newport to see and do. Of all of Newport's mansions, certainly the most opulent and lavish was Cornelius Vanderbilt's The Breakers. This lovely house, done in the Queen Anne Revival style, would make a nice home for anyone. Actually, it's only a few yards from the Breakers and was a playhouse for their children, the 7 children of Cornelius Vanderbilt. Many tea parties were hosted here by his daughter Gladys. A delightful spot. Here inside the playhouse, the children warmed themselves at this cozy fireplace. They sat at miniature furniture and were lighted by this interesting chandelier. These cottages are not museums or courthouses, but private dwellings. And this private dwelling is Beechwood, home of the Mrs. Astor. Here, one doesn't just visit the past, escorted about by employees, guides interpreting the past. Here, the guides are play actors, members of the Beechwood Theatrical Company, who take the part of Mrs. Astor's servants and guests, and who allow you to stroll through the rose garden, sip tea in the tea room, actually live the part. And now, as honorary members of the 400, shall we call upon the Mrs. Astor?
Welcome to the Astor's Beechwood. Yes, my dear. I see you've been practicing.
Sir, you asked me to remind you of your polo match this afternoon.
Oh, yes, of course.
Would you mind terribly if I accompanied you today?
Why, of course not. I should be charmed.
Lovely.
This, of course, is Mrs. Astor's latest portrait. Lovely, isn't it? It was painted just last season, 1890, by Mr. Carolus Durand. The gown, of course, comes from the House of Worth in Paris. That is where you ladies purchase your gowns, correct? When Mr. Worth discovered that Mrs. Astor was going to wear the gown in the portrait, he gave her a bit of a discount. It only cost her $30,000. Oh, excuse my mentioning the price. If you ladies begin to feel faint, I'll call your maids for you. Perhaps I should show you into the music room where Mrs. Astor will be greeting you.
Here she entertained guests, members of the 400. Mrs. Astor is responsible for coining that term. There are only 400 members of society really worth knowing. Probably influenced by the fact that her ballroom was designed to hold 400 guests. The actors at Beechwood will help you live the past. You'll have the time of their lives. The Astor's cottage is not the most pretentious of the Newport mansions, but it is elegant. Designed by William Morris Hunt for William K. Vanderbilt, the Marble House is certainly one of the most sumptuous of Newport's summer cottages. Makes use of the grand and petite Trianons of the palace at Versailles, strongly influenced here by the Louis XIV architecture. His use of marble and alabaster, of polished wood paintings, certainly made it rival one of the Renaissance palaces. Alva Erskine Smith Belmont, the former Mrs. William K. Vanderbilt, commissioned Richard and Joseph Howland Hunt to build this oriental tea room for her, overlooking the 50-foot cliffs, the Atlantic Ocean, behind the mansion, the Marble House. Oriental architecture was not new to Newport or the United States, but to so faithfully reproduce Oriental models was a different matter. The peaked roofs, the statuary, the oil paintings inside give it a peacefulness and serenity of the Oriental tea rooms, and indeed parties were hosted here in a gentler era. A fellow Philadelphian, although from a slightly later time, E.J. Berwyn, a coal magnate who built this beautiful home called the Elms, modeled after a French chateau from the 18th century. I, of course, enjoyed France. The beautiful grounds, the formal sunken garden, gazebo, the urns filled with flowers, and note the magnificent sculptures on the roof and in front of the home. Truly a delightful place to visit. Mr. Berwyn had this beautiful carriage house built for his estate, the Elms, and today it houses an antique auto show. Poor Richard said that the difference between men and boys was the price of their playthings. That is well illustrated by this automobile, the Lincoln Continental, built in 1948. The prototype was driven by Edsel Ford, for whom it was developed. This is a 1907 Morris, and here a 1931 standard Ford Coupe, Model A. This 1924 Packard is a classic among classics, and this 1938 Packard was a gift from the actress Carole Lombard to her film star fiancé Clark Gable on the occasion of their engagement. 1929 Auburn Speedster. This 1928 Phantom Rolls-Royce was driven by Robert Redford in the movie The Great Gatsby, written by F. Scott Fitzgerald and filmed here in Newport at Rosecliff and some of the other mansions. Ocean Drive is a gently curving road that runs for several miles on the southern end of Aquidneck Island. Its breathtaking beauty and quiet serenity reminds us that Aquidneck Island meant in the Indian tongue the Isle of Peace. As the cliff walk attracted the millionaires of an earlier era, Ocean Drive is dotted with the homes of today's wealthy and privileged, but no wealth is required to enjoy the beauty that abounds at every turn. Britain State Park is a great place for kite flying, and that is an activity that I have had some acquaintance with. Yet even that has been improved in the 20th century. Another place you must visit, and our last stop on Ocean Drive, is Hammersmith Farm, the girlhood home of Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy Onassis. Hate to leave the kites, but there is so much to see. Not only was this the first farm in Newport, but it is the only working farm left in the city. Originally part of a land grant of several thousand acres received by Mr. Brenton from the King, Mr. Brenton reserved 50 acres for himself and named it Hammersmith after his birthplace in England. When President John F. Kennedy was using Hammersmith as the summer White House, the presidential seal was flown from the flagpole outside. He later made it a present to his father-in-law. After the marriage of John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Bouvier, their wedding reception was held here at Hammersmith, and Jacqueline threw her wedding bouquet from this balcony. This is the presidential office. This is where the president worked. This is the presidential desk where John F. Kennedy signed into law bills dealing with public work and with foreign trade. But Hammersmith was first of all a home, a comfortable home where real people lived. You will enjoy the hospitality. And speaking of hospitality, while I enjoyed my bed and breakfast last night, I'm ready to try a 20th century inn.
Welcome to the Sheraton, Dr. Franklin. Your room is all ready for you.
Thank you, Cortland. You know, this inn is a far cry from the inns of my day. It's a veritable city in itself, with shops, restaurants, taverns, and I'm quite anxious to see the room. Most of my life I was content with a straw mattress. As I prospered, I could afford a feather bed. But such wonders as the 20th century doth afford. And even the climate is controlled. Warm outside and cool within. Truly a marvel. The Sheridan is on an island, and the view is spectacular. I have always enjoyed swimming. Indeed, I earned my livelihood teaching the activity in London. But here at the Sheridan, there are 2 pools for the activity, one within and another outside. Truly, this is a pleasure dome. After a good night's rest, I'm ready for a train ride. All aboard! The Newport train runs every day in the summer and on weekends the rest of the year. About 100 years after the Declaration of Independence was signed, the great railroads were developed in America. This train brought passengers from Boston and Fall River to catch the night boats to New York. Along the route, we see many interesting sights, including the Newport Navy base. Along the right-of-way, occasionally you'll notice an apple tree. These weren't planted. The engineers and passengers brought their lunches and cores were tossed out the windows. At the end of the ride is Portsmouth, home of the green animals. There are over 80 sculptured trees and shrubs here. These famous gardens of the late Mrs. Alice Baton are now open to the public and well worth a visit. If you're coming back from seeing the green animals by automobile, you might stop on Highway 114 and visit Prescott Farm. An excellent place to bring children. Prescott Farm abounds with farm animals and fowls, and children may purchase grain to feed them. There you go, my feathered friends. This was the military headquarters of General Richard Prescott, commander of the British and German troops in Newport. He was equally detested by the Americans and his own soldiers. He must have had some charm, for he had at least one friend. Mrs. Overing, the wife of a local farmer, visited him here in the upstairs room of his headquarters. So actively engaged were they that they didn't hear Lieutenant Colonel William Barton and the American troops approach. General Prescott was arrested and escorted out of the building in his nightshirt. He was eventually traded for an American prisoner of war. If you like spectator sports and if you like horses, every Sunday afternoon at 3, a short distance from Prescott Farm, there are polo matches. This is Lefty, prettiest polo pony in Newport. You know, polo came to Newport over 100 years ago. Mr. James Gordon Bennett had a friend from England, a Mr. Candy, who one night after a party rode his polo pony through the reading room, an exclusive men's club. The members were upset and asked Mr. Bennett not to bring his friend back. Mr. Bennett then built the casino in competition and retaliation. And the very first international polo match in America was held at Martin Park here in Newport. They contended for the Westchester Cup. You're a pretty girl, aren't you, Lefty? This is a means of transportation with which I'm much more familiar. Let's go visit another sporting activity. The game of ALAI was played 500 years before we signed the Declaration of Independence. Played with the pelota and the cesta. It was played by the Basques in Spain. This hard ball flies through the air at speeds that have been clocked more than 188 miles an hour. A dangerous and certainly one of the world's most exciting games. If you like to participate, a great source of recreational activity is the 20th century game of golf. There are 4 public golf courses right close to Newport. This morning I'm just across the bridge at the Jamestown Country Club, a great 9-hole course. After such an exhilarating morning of exercise, I'm ready for lunch. Shall we go to one of Newport's fine restaurants? This is the SS Newport, a permanently docked ship.
My very beautiful dinner companion is Kirsten, the dining room manager and hostess at the SS Newport. We'll have the lobster, black pasta for the lady, and I'll have mine poached in whiskey. Such delights are the specialty of this very elegant gourmet dining room. Quite good. Beyond good, it's excellent.
A brisk walk after such a fine meal through the wharf area, and then a short distance away to La Petite Auberge for an after-dinner drink.
Mr. Franklin.
Ah, Roger, mon ami.
Good evening. Please come inside.
I'm sitting here talking to my friend Roger Poutier, one of the nicest people in Newport and the owner and proprietor of La Petite Auberge, a delightful French restaurant that was once owned and built for Stephen Decatur, who distinguished himself in the Battle of Tripoli. Captain Decatur was killed here in Newport in a duel, contending for the favors of a young lady, I understand. He was the father of Commodore Decatur, who distinguished himself in the War of 1812. This warm, genial restaurant is an absolute must when one visits Newport for the finest in French cuisine. Newport also abounds with a number of interesting museums. The War College Museum is on the site of Newport's equivalent of Plymouth Rock. Here the forefathers landed. Inside is the history of the United States Navy and of some of its munitions.
This is the very first torpedo built in America. Built on Goat Island in 1871. Prior to that time, torpedoes simply referred to any underwater explosive. Most of them were in fixed position, much as what we would refer to as mines today. But in 1871, the United States Navy developed this self-propelled automobile torpedo, predecessor to a long line of such instruments of destruction. John Paul Jones is perhaps best known for saying, "I have not yet begun to fight." But he also said, "Give me a fast ship, for I intend to go in harm's way." And here the continental sloop Providence, the fast ship, his first command. And he certainly did go in harm's way, one of the most successful of our naval vessels, as well as being the first. The War College is full of interesting exhibits. And going from war to peace, let's visit another maritime exhibition. The Museum of Yachting was founded in 1980. It's dedicated to the preservation of classic yachts and the tradition of yachting. It's a repository for memorabilia and photographs linked to this tradition. The museum is beautifully situated in Fort Adams State Park, overlooking Narragansett Bay, the entrance of Newport Harbor. Anchored out front is the museum's flagship, the Shamrock V, built in 1930 for Sir Thomas Lipton. Its central gallery focuses on the yachting tradition at the turn of the century Newport. This examples of small crafts are on display. Upstairs, the recently opened single-handed Hall of Fame records the history of daring sailors who have traveled the world's oceans alone. The summer of 1988 will see the opening of the museum's newest gallery, which will be dedicated to the history of the America's Cup and will feature an exhibit entitled The Great J-Boats. The oldest active military company in continuous service in the United States is the Artillery Company of Newport. It has been in existence since colonial times. This is one of 6 cannon cast by Paul Revere in Boston in 1795 for the state of Rhode Island. 4 of them are owned and used by the Artillery Company of Newport. Members of the company take part in historical reenactments. Its headquarters houses military memorabilia from around the world. The Newport Historical Society houses this museum, and tennis buffs from around the world will be enchanted by the Tennis Hall of Fame. We absolutely must not miss the Art Museum of Newport.
Nor must we overlook the Doll Museum. Fascinating little figures. Any visit to Newport is a delight, and my visit to the 20th century has been exciting. You can visit both the old and the new when you come to Newport.